Thanks for watching Enabling IT Modernization, Building a Next-Generation Network Foundation, presented by CenturyLink. I'm Francis Rose with the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. In this special program, we'll cover how civilian federal agencies can get to the next-generation network, how those same agencies can secure their overall environments, and some private sector best practices that could make those transformations possible. I'll be joined by IT leaders from the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Agriculture, and some of their counterparts in the private sector. It's an important topic and a great lineup, so let's get right to it. Joining me first, Joe Clemmievich, the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Justice, and David Young, Senior Vice President of Strategic Government at CenturyLink. Gentlemen, thanks both very much for joining me. Joe, what are you focused on IT modernization today?
IT modernization is extremely important to the Department of Justice. First thing I want to do is make sure we close and complete the initiatives we have underway. Those would be, when I look at things like infrastructure, data center consolidation, we've closed a significant number of data centers and want to make sure we drive that to logical completion and really optimize what we have. Moving a lot of applications and systems to commercial clouds. Moving everybody to a 365 cloud-based email system. We're in the final phases of building a cloud-optimized TIC so that we can connect to our cloud business partners basically through a superhighway. And then a lot of initiatives around cybersecurity, SOC optimization, and other things around identity management.
It sounds like what Joe has on his plate is similar to what agencies all across government are doing. Administration came in and made IT modernization an important priority, but it was also a priority for the previous administration. So a lot of agencies are kind of in the middle of a variety of pieces, same way Joe is. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a great assessment, Francis. I think it's awesome to hear Joe go through his list, right? Case management, security, probably network modernization, a variety of things, right? To hear somebody in Joe's perspective of an agency be able to see all of the different moving parts. And you're absolutely right. Every agency, whether it's a cabinet level or a smaller agency, is going through something very similar. And they all come from a legacy of their experiences with technology. And so something like the FBI, very big case management. U.S. courts would also be very similar in that way, big justice. But another agency might be about grants, and so their technologies around that. And so there's a good tie to technology, but how technology is being used is very different between the agencies. But yes, they are all looking at the challenge of how to modernize what they've been using.
One of the things that permeated the list that Joe laid out there was, I heard cloud mentioned a number of different places and in a number of different ways. Are you starting to see that, Dave, as the leading piece of what agencies are doing vis-a-vis IT modernization?
Well, sure. Again, by agency,
yeah.
Some are running to cloud, some are walking to cloud. But yes, everybody's going to use that piece of technology in their enterprise. How it's going to be used, how it's going to be managed, how it's going to be architected, all very important things. And again, all very unique to an agency on what it's trying to achieve, what applications they're moving to the cloud. It would be great to hear some perspective from Joe.
I think everybody's moving to some kind of hybrid instantiation. We're going to end up with 3 core data centers, very large data centers, highly optimized. And we'll certainly be taking advantage of commercial cloud environments to expand. A lot of the work that we have, we know when we're going to be having a surge, and we'll surge certainly into the commercial space. In other cases, it makes sense just to run entirely in a commercial cloud. And if I can take advantage of something I can just buy, software as a service, running in somebody else's data center, that actually is my preferred way to go. I don't have to actually run it and own it and maintain it.
Is it your sense that that's becoming the de facto way that CIOs like Joe across government want to do it, Dave, that they'd rather buy something and that's the first place that they go rather than trying to build it themselves? We talked about this for a long time, and I wonder if we're actually there yet.
I totally agree with that statement. I think the key word that Joe used that you hear everywhere is the word hybrid. I don't know that there is something that is entirely off the shelf that solves an agency's problems. And so the agency has to work through what is appropriate to put in the cloud, what security parameters you're going to put around it, how you're going to access that information, how you're going to manage the cloud, if you're going to use multiple public clouds. All of those things go into a pretty good set of ingredients to solve the problem.
Joe, last year, Federal Computer Week reported that you acknowledged funding constraints make it difficult for agencies to contemplate broad changes to their operations. You obviously have figured out a way to do it based on that list that you gave us. But is it your sense that with some of the pieces that are in place now, with the MGT Act, with Congress understanding the importance of IT modernization and so on better, that that's changed at all?
Well, I think when I look at modernization and these initiatives that we were talking about, it's a multi-year effort. None of this stuff's going to happen in 1 year, and funding is required over a sustained period of time. So that's one of the challenges you have, is how do you keep that funding going? And I look at funding as a pacing function. It doesn't change where you want to be. It just changes maybe how fast you can get there. And I think the more flexibility you can give to a CIO, the more, faster they can get to that end state. We don't have any immediate plans right now to leverage the MGT Act Working Capital Fund, because we've got a variety of funds that we're taking advantage of. Three primary means that I've been very much involved with supporting the components and their appropriation requests. We also have something called a Justice Information Sharing Technology Fund, and this is essentially that multi-year modernization fund, and we've also got special use accounts that we can tap into for IT modernization. It is great that we've got broad support for IT modernization from not only the White House but from the Hill. I think people really understand the importance of this, not only from a digital services perspective and providing better services to the citizens, but from a cybersecurity perspective. And ultimately, there's efficiencies to be gained in the tail.
So I'd like to add a little bit on to that too. I think what we see with technology, especially in the commercial marketplace, it's not a one-year event. It's not driven by this year's budget. And I think as we look at the use of commercial technologies and how they adapt to the federal marketplace, we've got to also look at our procurement practices as well, and how we budget and how we build plans, because one-year funding gets very difficult with some of the things that somebody like Joe's working through, where it's a 2 or 3 year life cycle, but he's only got this year's funding to do what his goal is. And so I think if we're really smart about it, we would also be looking at how we set up our budgets, how we set up procurement to be able to handle that multi-year funding versus single year.
Up next, a pair of agency-level chief information security officers on the link between cybersecurity and IT modernization. So keep it right here for more Enabling IT Modernization, Building a Next-Generation Network Foundation on the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network.
Enabling IT Modernization, Building a Next-Generation Network Foundation is brought to you by CenturyLink, your link to what's next. Learn more at CenturyLink.com.
So far, we've covered some of the IT modernization issues civilian agencies face and how the conversation around legacy systems has changed since the Trump administration released its management agenda. Now you'll hear from a pair of CISOs about the push to reinvent cybersecurity at their respective agencies. Joining me now, Paul Beckman, Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, and Tacey Somerset, the Acting CISO at the Department of Agriculture. Thanks both very much for joining me. Paul, I want to start with you because I think a lot of folks would figure that information security inside DHS is something that NPPD would handle. You're not associated with them. Your office is entirely different. So tell me about what your portfolio is and how it works.
Okay. So MPPD is a component of the headquarters component, as is the Office of the CIO, which I am a part of. With respect to my role, I am the Chief Information Security Officer of DHS, so my job is to protect the internal department of DHS. So I'm worried about covering the headquarters and the components like TSA, FEMA, CBP, and Coast Guard. MPPD's mission is that externally facing entity where they are responsible for working with private industry, other federal agencies and departments, and the critical infrastructure pieces of the
How does that portfolio split, and how does what your portfolio is focused on direct the way that you and Dr. Zangardi, the CIO at DHS, think about the cybersecurity strategy for the agency as a whole?
Part of it, I guess, is just we are constantly in a state where we are trying to manage the complexity of the network and the architectures that that network is built upon. And that's one of the things with respect to the modernization piece that I see as my primary role in the cybersecurity, is to manage that complexity. Complexity is the arch enemy of security to a large degree. The more complex the system, as you know, the wider the attack surface, the more holes that there are for an attacker to punch through. My job as a defender is to protect from the interior. So I'm trying to, it's still that same old adage. A defender has to guard against every single possible attack. An attacker just needs to find one. So I see my job when we talk about IT modernization is to, wherever I can, to simplify the architecture, make it less and less complex every step of the way, so that I can start reducing the number of holes, not increasing them.
Tacey, you're really on the cutting edge of all of this as the acting CISO at Agriculture, which is the lighthouse agency for the IT modernization effort that the administration's undertaken. What's your sense of the way that cybersecurity is fitting into that, and how that could potentially be a model for other agencies that want to follow along behind Agriculture and do what you're doing?
Absolutely. So, much like what Paul was saying, managing that complexity is so key, and using the leverage that we have with the COEs, the lighthouse agency that we are, we're able to reduce our landscape footprint tremendously by consolidating data centers, by moving some of these applications out into the cloud, as well as consolidating our networks, and even if that, consolidating our management of mobile devices, for example. By and large, that really enables us to reduce that footprint, and that complexity goes down. Therefore, that ability to come in and penetrate our network and penetrate our infrastructure is reduced tremendously. That leaves us to focus on the bigger picture, more things that are coming in and attacking us day to day. So we're able to take that and really reverse that and re-engineer the way that we're doing business.
We need to shrink the attack service, not increase it.
What are the ways that you're going about doing that, and how does that fit into an IT modernization framework, Paul?
How we reduce the complexity?
Yeah. Well, and the attack surface.
It's I guess the manner in which that networking is provided. Right now we have our OneNet architecture, which has been around since the inception of DHS. So we're taking a real hard look on what that next generation architecture looks like, the next OneNet. And Dr. Zangardi is taking his time, and I appreciate it. I appreciated David's comments from the previous one. Some are running to the cloud.
Yeah.
Dr. Zangardi, thankfully, is walking to the cloud and understands that we really need to take our time in understanding what the requirements are, what are the missions. So we're bringing in some integrators to really do a deep dive. And this is the part, I think, with modernization that a lot of people are missing, and that the technology is one piece of it. The more important, or equally important piece, is the soft part, the people piece. You need to do true and effective change management. And by that I mean you need to come in, sit down, and do a really deep dive on the requirements analysis, understand the mission, understand the requirements. The mission and the requirements should be what drives the technology, not vice versa. Technology should not drive the mission. We got to get out of this field of dreams mentality that a lot of technologists tend to have, where I know better than anybody what you need, what you're going to get. So we build these things without really doing a thoughtful and thorough requirements analysis. So we end up building something that they don't end up coming to. So that's kind of what I like the way that we're doing this. We're going to bring in some integrators. We're going to do some really deep, thoughtful requirements analysis and understand what the requirements really are before we get to that. So and then back to my complexity thing, I all along the way can insert myself, ensuring that whatever decisions are made are reducing complexity, not increasing it.
Reducing complexity was something that Gary Washington, the CIO at your agency, talked about when he was on Government Matters the last time. What does that mean from a cyber perspective? What's he expecting somebody in your position to deliver to him, or to make available to him, or to help him with in order to be able to reduce the threat service and to make the network more simple?
So by and large, the IT modernization work that we're doing is technology, right? But overall, it's really the people. You know, to Paul's point, we are really focused, and that's one thing that I'm really drilling into within my workforce, is to bring the people together, open up those lines of communication, and enable the collaboration to happen across the board. Other things too is empowering our workforce to institute those changes, to really rally around and bring the agencies and mission areas into the conversation, and empowering them too so we can improve our posture at USDA. Those are the types of things that Gary's looking for us to do. So it's really, again, it's that focus on the people part that is kind of the missing part of the conversation when you talk about cyber, is bringing that collaboration together, sharing of information across the board, because you have multiple cyber operations across USDA. You can imagine the communication that has to happen between us and the coordination, right?
Yeah.
So enabling ourselves to do that and really opening that up has had tremendous effects across the board.
Policy around IT modernization has changed a lot the past few years. The PMA, of course, has been a factor, but also legislation like the MGT Act and executive orders like the one on CIO authorities. Trey Hodgkins of the IT Alliance for the Public Sector gives us a crash course next. You're watching Enabling IT Modernization, Building a Next Generation Network Foundation. Stay with us.
Enabling IT Modernization, Building a Next Generation Network Foundation is brought to you by CenturyLink, your link to what's next. Learn more at CenturyLink.com.
According to the President's management agenda, provisions in the Modernizing Government Technology Act are an enabling capability. The PMA says that act will provide agencies with the authorities and the technical expertise to move government IT to closer parity with leading private sector companies. Here, a policy-driven look at that tectonic shift. Trey Hodgkins is Senior Vice President at ITAPS, the IT Alliance for the Public Sector. Trey, thanks very much for coming on the program. We have a lot of pieces that we've talked about. We have the President's management agenda. We have the IT modernization process that OMB is undertaking. We have the MGT Act. We have FedRAMP, which has existed for a long time. Tell me what you think a holistic IT modernization structure looks like using all of these pieces across government.
Well, you kind of hit on the high points. Of course, the Centers of Excellence is sort of where the rubber's meeting the road to implement this new framework and to move elements of IT investment into the new realm, wherever we're going. And of course, those contracts are now under RFQ, and we should see hopefully something before the end of this fiscal year. Those contracts awarded and something put in place at Ag. So I think that the pieces are all there. I think, you know, as always with these kinds of things, the major element is where's the funding going to come from. There's some money, as you noted, in MGT Act. Where that's going to end up this year is still being debated. Certainly for the Technology Modernization Fund, the centralized fund, and then different agencies are in different states of play with their working capital funds. And you know, I anticipate some will be able to program dollars into those this year, some won't. So that's going to be another outstanding element here. That it's really it's the long pole in the tent. Frankly, it's the piece that we've tried to put some mechanisms in place. Industry working with the Hill and others, and of course the TMF is working, but it's going to cost a lot of money to get the government where they want to go, and it's not going to be something we can fund overnight. So those are going to be, I think, probably the last outstanding piece that really needs some strong attention.
Structurally, it seems to me you can draw pretty clear lines from the President's management agenda to the Centers of Excellence and some of the other priorities that OMB has laid out. FedRAMP is another area here, and then as you mentioned, there are a couple others, the IT modernization funds, or the working capital funds, excuse me, at the individual agencies. Those lines, those connectors are not so clear, I don't think. What would clear that up in your mind? Is it something that OMB should do? Is it something the agency should do? Is it just entirely the funding issue that you talked about that's Congress's responsibility, or is there something else that somebody else should be doing in order to try to build this into kind of one building instead of a couple that we have right now?
I think, and before we forget, we should throw in the other buzzwords of cybersecurity and shared services, which are, of course, central. Cyber, of course, is central to this effort. It is a driver for this effort. And then shared services is a probable outcome and a benefactor. I think that the pieces are all there, and I think that the players are all there. I think that we are in the very initial phases with the Centers of Excellence. These are test cases, frankly, and the Lighthouse Agency is ag, but we'll see where we go from there and what we need to do differently in other agencies. But I think the pieces are really there, and they're really starting to fall in place. And the other thing that I think that was thoughtful in putting this together is that no one entered this thinking this was a quick bang, short-term fix. Everyone has been very clear from day one. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to fix this overnight. This is long-term. This is probably multi-administration and multi-Congress. And so hopefully, I think the biggest challenge in all of that will be finding the dollars and then sustaining the critical mass that exists today, the recognition on the Hill and the bureaucracies in the political realm that this is something that demands focus. If we can sustain that, I think we'll get where we need to go.
Another thing I think is important to note is that the administration seems to be going for replicable solutions rather than here's a solution for the Agriculture Department and then whoever comes along behind them, whoever the next agency is going to be, we're going to have to figure out how to do whatever it is that they need to do. That's not what anybody wants here.
No, we're truly looking at an enterprise level set of solutions. That's why I threw in shared services. And cyber, frankly, is something that is increasingly looked at as something that can be offered as a shared service. But we're now finally getting to a point where there is a demand and a desire to implement technology in the federal government at the enterprise level. And so, and then you have, of course, your mission needs, but those are going to be the specific areas where you're serving specific citizen or customer sets. But the enablement will happen at that enterprise level. So when we buy cloud, it's going to be at an enterprise level, and you plug in your specific data application, your data use apps, et cetera, for your mission area. So that's a substantial change, and I think that that's the kind of change that is a real indicator that we're doing this differently.
Up next, industry's approach to IT modernization. We'll cover some of the most important elements featured in a civilian agency's IT and security portfolios and how they integrate with customer data. More of this special program, Enabling IT Modernization, right after this.
Enabling IT Modernization, building a next-generation network foundation, is brought to you by CenturyLink, your link to what's next. Learn more at CenturyLink.com.
So far, you've heard from the CIO at the Department of Justice about how his office is modernizing IT and a pair of agency CISOs on the push to reinvent cybersecurity at their respective agencies. We also covered policy changes impacting IT modernization. Now let's get some insight from the contracting side of the equation. Here again, David Young, Senior Vice President of Strategic Government at CenturyLink, and joining us to wrap things up, Zain Ahmed, Senior Director and General Manager of the Civilian Sector at CenturyLink. Gentlemen, thanks both for coming on. Sure. Zain, I want to start with you. What's your number one takeaway, do you think, from what we've heard so far in the program?
The number one takeaway for me is kind of the cybersecurity challenge that they're facing. And it all comes down to the whole framework of process, people, technology. And we always focus on the technology and forget the process side or the people side. It's very important to integrate all three of those vectors and make sure everything is aligned accordingly.
I think I was very heartily encouraged, Dave, by the fact that both of our Chief Information Security Officers spoke several times about the importance of people. Getting to Zane's point, this is something that government is coming around to, maybe not as quickly as we had hoped, but it's starting to happen.
And I think it is happening, Francis. I think we've been talking about change. And change, if we look behind us, has occurred just about every month, every week of our lives. When we look out the windshield at change, it can be daunting at times, but we must remember that we've adapted so many different times throughout our careers and how we've used technology. And so I think that's at the cusp of being comfortable with what's occurring with technology, is it is changing, and it's changing in ways and coming together in ways we haven't seen before, but it's nothing that we haven't overcome as technologists, as modernizing networks in the past. We've done it numerous times. It's just time to do it again.
Why do you think that's where we are today?
Well, I think if we went back in time, the government has been really the early adopter and creator of technology. DARPA and all of the things that they've seeded, what we're talking about today in the internet, it all comes from the foresight that the government has. And so the early adoption, the building of big programs and systems is a rich heritage that our government has. Now morphing that a little bit into using commercial technologies is where we're beginning to see that challenge. And like Zane said, it's a lifestyle. I think we probably could learn from the cyber side of things, because the cyber world has not been static. The cyber world is a constant evolution. And if we look at their pace of change and their adaptive belief of technology, we could probably sync that with what we're doing with networking and cloud and hybrid WANs, things like that, where we're looking at it through a lifestyle perspective and not through a contract perspective. You and I have chatted before. We've been very fortunate over the course of some of our careers that technology changed when the contract changed. Mm-hmm. And that pretty much is gone at this point. GSA went longer on contract, and technology is occurring, change is occurring much faster. And so I think, again, back to cyber and living it as a lifestyle, which is what the cyber guys do. If we began to put all of those pieces together and began to look at it holistically, the personality I would pick would be from that cyber perspective on understanding, learning, changing, adapting.
So this lifestyle idea, I think, is interesting and important, because it's not just you guys that are saying this. Paul Beckman talked about it earlier in the program. Suzette Kent talked about it, the federal CIO, when she was on Government Matters the last time. This IT modernization concept is not going to end at some point in time. No. This is how we're going to live if we're going to continue to live in the modern world, in the public space, for a long time to come, right?
I mean, we will, and honestly, I believe like the consumption model for security or networking is broken today. You rely on carriers who built these big networks that have virtualized environments in there. They can bring commercial services to bear faster and get those deployed efficiently, and that gets you reach and scale, right? And as your network evolves, as Dave was saying, it's a verb now. Network is taking action. How do you continue to evolve your threat vector and control it and make sure you're addressing all the security threats that are out there?
What does that mean strategically? What do you think agencies will be doing differently strategically 3 years from now, 5 years from now, than what they're doing today, or maybe what they did 2 years ago?
I think approaching the problem will be a little different, and you're thinking you're living in a dynamic world, and things are changing at a rapid pace. So what you would be thinking about is, how do I future-proof my solution? How do I future-proof my network? If I need to add something, I'm not doing an overhaul, right? So if you build the security, you build the intelligence within your network, it becomes a thing, right? You can deploy it rapidly. Everything is there for you to use. You can pick and choose what services you want to your threat level. So you can make those intelligent decisions on demand. Mm-hmm. That's where I think we will get to, and that's what we are looking to get agencies to.
Zane used the word dynamic. That's not a word that historically has been associated, at least for the last decade or so, with federal government information technology. What do you think changes that, Dave? What has to happen inside organizations to change that? And I wonder if that's ultimately a technology change, if it's a strategic change, or if it's just a people change, as we've talked about earlier.
You know, Francis, I think it's probably a mix of all three, and depends on the agency. Mm-hmm. In some places, we'll have very strong people leaders that will drive change at a rate that probably feels uncomfortable to others. In some agencies, we might have technology forcing, and users and how constituents connect to government forcing that technology change. And so I think it's going to be very diverse across our government in how people connect to it and what the purpose is of an agency like MPPD. We heard Paul earlier in what their goal is. But I think it's going to be vast and varying across our government.
And thank you for watching this special program, Enabling IT Modernization, Building a Next Generation Network Foundation, presented by CenturyLink. For more information on the subject matter we discussed today, go to govmatters.tv/IT Modernization. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Francis Rose.